Welcome everyone to our today's webinar. You have what cybercriminals want, data protection and pitfalls. And this is 7th in our ARC Fraud Awareness Month webinar series. So we really welcome you and thank you for joining us. Hi, I'm Judy Howard with ARC, and joining me today I have my colleagues, Cornelius Haddington and Doug Nass. They are both directors in our risk and compliance management area here at ARC, and combined they have over 45 years of fraud prevention, risk management, all this sort of intrigue in this area in regards to trying to help fight fraud and educate all of you in that arena. I'm very excited today. We have with us, for our guest presenter for this webinar, is Rich Licato. He is our Chief Information Security Officer here at ARC. He has been with us for over more than 7 years, and his job here at ARC includes information security, physical security, business continuity, and network operations. But Rich has spent, again, over 25 years, and a lot of his careers in the IT security risk area, compliance, operational enterprise risk management, and systems development. So Rich really, again, like Cornelius and Doug, in his discipline, comes with a lot of experience. He's, again, not been ARC this whole time, so his career really is quite broad. And through this, before I turn it over to Rich, I want to encourage you all to ask questions to Rich today. You go to your control panel on the right-hand side, type in your questions, and Rich will be pausing throughout his presentation so that we can answer some of those. So I encourage you, we have a lot of experience. Doug and Cornelius might be chiming in as well. So ask any questions that you have in regards to fraud prevention, risk management, and compliance. So Rich, without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you to get started.
Thank you, Judy, and thank you to everyone again for joining us today on a Friday afternoon. Really appreciate you being here, and hopefully we can talk a little bit about security and data protection. So here's today's agenda. We'll talk a little bit about why we do what we do in information security, and then we'll discuss a little bit about what is it that you have that cyber criminals are trying to get and some of the methods that they use to try to get at that information that you have. And then we're going to sit down and talk a little bit about how to protect yourself. And so, some of these concepts and ideas might be a refresher for a lot of people. Some of them are basic, but hopefully some of them will get you thinking about what else you can do to protect information in general. And finally, we'll end with a couple of examples, which I've labeled here as the ARC file, some things that we've seen in our daily work. And then there will be questions throughout, as Judy has mentioned before. So hopefully everyone's familiar with ARC, but if you aren't with some of the details of us, we're about 400 people headquartered here in Arlington, Virginia, and you can see some of the stats that we have in terms of the number of accredited agency locations that we deal with, as well as the participating carriers, and our sales volume that we have, and we handle about almost $90 billion a year in airline sales. So our objective for today is really talking about information security and some of the best practices that are out there. So we'll talk a little bit about handling sensitive data, and with that goes first identifying sensitive data, how to stay safe online, whether that's in your job or in your personal life. We'll talk about some things that we see via email, as well as identity and physical safety risks. And then we'll talk a little bit about social media and the use of technology. So we're going to try to cover everything, and we'll see how we do. And of course, as you have any questions, please type them in your chat page. So why do we talk about cybersecurity and cybersecurity awareness? Why do we try to educate people on this topic? So first, we would like everybody to be safe, and we want everybody to be able to identify risks as they occur, because individuals really are the first and last line of defense in protecting themselves as well as the organization against these cyber criminals. So you're not only protecting the company, you also are responsible for your client data, and so you're protecting those people as well. And you know, there's a lot of talk about privacy. There's a lot of regulation coming out. You know, you hear a lot about Europe first with GDPR. So, you know, how are you going to protect individual information? And now California has just passed a law recently, which is to be implemented in 2020, about data protection and individual privacy rights. So, you know, it really is all of our responsibility to understand the risks and to understand how to mitigate those risks when we're talking about handling individuals' information and using the technology that we do today. So this is a quote that I like to always say within our organization, that cybersecurity is not a department, but an attitude. And I really believe that that's true. You'll notice that I use it on my tagline as on this presentation. You know, thinking about information security, thinking about kind of the risks that we face is really everyone's job, as I mentioned before. But it's not just, you know, the group that's sitting over in the corner on the 4th floor or something like that to worry about. Of course, we would like to depend on our cybersecurity departments, and I depend on my staff to help keep ARC as well as all of the employees as secure as possible and the data that we protect. But it's really about education and getting everyone to understand their role in protecting data. So, you know, I use this as an example, and I say it often, and I'm really trying to get everyone as aware as possible, and today is a good example of that as well. So let's talk about what information you have that people are trying to get at. Of course, there's what we label as personally identifiable information, or what you commonly hear as PII, right? Name, address, phone number, maybe passport ID, depending on what you're dealing with. That's always, you know, the basics of trip details, dates that people are traveling, the traveler's name, where they're going to and from. I don't know if that's really thought of as information that the cyber criminals are readily after, but it is interesting for them to take a look at, and I do think that people are trying to actively steal that information. I mean, if you think about it, if I knew where somebody was traveling and when, there's tons of different things that I can do. Payment information, so of course, credit card numbers, the sensitive data about credit cards, so expiration date and the CVV, as well as maybe bank account information, depending on how your customers have set up their accounts. And of course, you know, in a lot of areas, it's the access to ticketing systems that you have that cyber criminals are after as well. So all of these things are what's trying to be exploited any way that they can. They all have some amount of value, some more than others. And you can go out on the web and see what value some of these things have. Credit cards used to be one of the most valuable assets that are out there. Now it's more about personal information. If somebody can get at some of the things that are in people's backgrounds that maybe they use as security answers to questions, that has a value too. So it really is kind of a complete identity and kind of this set of information, not just any one of these pieces, that criminals are trying to create and then monetize. So what do cyber criminals do to try to get at this information? So traditionally, at first there was spam, right? This is just kind of junk mail that showed up in your email box and they're trying to get some type of reaction. That transformed into what we call phishing, and that's really kind of targeting a group or an audience to react to a message and get them to respond, which then later transformed into spear phishing, and this is really a specific targeted attack, maybe to an individual or to members within a company, and you know, these days, the cyber criminals really do their research, right? There's a lot of public information out on websites. They sit there, they look at it, they try to target who they're going after. I've seen a bunch of different messages that are supposedly from our CFO to our CEO asking for various different financial information, you know, trying to pay a bill off quickly, maybe some routing information. So just trying to get you to react to a targeted email. And of course, any of these things, they use malware, so something that can get installed on your system, right? Maybe it's a keylogger to see, to capture your user ID and password, maybe to see what accounts you're going to or what you're trying to access. And then even that transformed into ransomware. So that's really trying to do some amount of physical destruction, either to destroy your assets or to extort money from individuals. There's also credit card fraud. So trying to get something for nothing, right? If I've either purchased credit card numbers from the internet or created some fake credit card to exploit that. Also social engineering, just basically calling people up, maybe getting some information via the phone, you know, saying I'm a technician, right? I think we've all gotten different calls from Microsoft support, or somebody saying that, you know, law enforcement is after you and you have to do something to rectify that. And then confidence schemes, right? So posing as somebody else in terms of trying to get information from you in one way or another. And this can be via phone or email or, you know, even physical presence. So I'll take a pause right there to see if there's any questions at the moment before we get into talking about cybersecurity best practices.
Yeah, hi, Rich. Yeah, we do have a question that's come in, and it's really like, what does ARC do, like what additional layers of security are provided for agencies that maybe aren't fully ARC accredited? Do we do anything, you know, for our VTCs? I mean, VTCs obviously fall under the ARC umbrella, but, you know, folks that just have an IATAN card, or do we work with any other entities in collaboration to protect, like, ARC agencies, you know, IATA agencies? I mean, is it just really, can you talk a little bit more about that?
So we don't do anything specific for agencies externally. Certainly any information that ARC has and acquires, we protect just like anything else, and we do not make a distinction between who gave us that information. So we try to do all of our protection in terms of when people connect to us, when they transmit information to us, as well as once that information comes in to ARC and we set it into our systems and process it. So from beginning to end, we're protecting information regardless of who gave it to us, but there's nothing specific, you know, based on what agencies are externally that I would say that we do. If there's something more specific in that question, perhaps we can follow up and answer that offline.
Okay, great. Thanks, Rich. And I think I'm going to let you continue right now.
Okay. So let's take a little bit of time and talk about cybersecurity best practices. So handling sensitive data. So first of all, the question would be for most organizations is, do you even classify the information that you're handling? Do you know what is sensitive and what isn't, or do you treat everything as sensitive? So, you know, large and small organizations handle these things differently. So at ARC, we have a specific list, and we say, you know, anything that looks like this or has these data elements in it is considered sensitive data. So, you know, some basic data handling is, you know, you don't share confidential data with others. You really should be on a need-to-know basis. So there's, you know, if I'm handling someone's account, there's no reason to leave that information out or to disclose information that has been provided to me without anybody needing to know it. also, if I'm working on confidential or sensitive information, not to do it out in the open or talk about things where people can overhear or look at that data. So it's really being made aware of what is sensitive and being able to protect it at all times. And we'll talk a little bit about physical handling a little bit later on. The other thing that I would suggest is, you should always, on systems, is you should mask the information if possible, right? And so one example is for PCI is in credit card data is that you should use the first 6 last 4 of a credit card number, and that is seen as protected because you're missing those middle 6 digits. That's a practice that we employ here, and as we're going through our transformation efforts here at ARC, we're doing that as well. So any way that you can obfuscate any information, whether it's in electronic form or within physical form, right? If you work on sensitive data in different departments, sometimes they have screen filters, those types of things. But first, you have to be made aware of what you consider sensitive, and then you should employ methods to protect that data in whatever format it comes in. So some ideas for sensitive data handling. What should you do? Certainly, if you're printing something that's sensitive, is to don't leave it on the printer. But I can tell you, certainly throughout my career, there's been plenty of times where I've seen salary histories or maybe performance reviews that somebody has left on the printer. One thing that we've done at ARC to change that is to have all of our printing be done by our badge IDs. So we go up to the printer and we use our badge to release our print job. It doesn't automatically go from the printer. That's something that we employed. But certainly if you're printing sensitive information, to be aware of it and not to leave it at the printer. If you have to retain physical files, right, and they're sensitive, don't leave them out in a place that's easily accessible. Lock them up, put them in a storage room, put them in locked filing cabinets, whatever you need to do. Of course, what's better is not to have physical information in the first place, but then you also have to worry about electronic information, how you clean that up. So even if it's in electronic format as well as physical, you have to come up with what's called a retention schedule, right? So depending on what type of information you have, you should periodically go through it and delete it. So one example that I like to use here is, when we talk about tax returns, and you ask about how long should you keep tax returns for, everybody says 7 years. The law actually states it is 3 years, but depending on what's in your tax return changes that. So if you have certain types of capital gains, that extends it to 4 years or 5 years, and then the longest piece in the tax code is to hold something for 7 years, which is why some people just say the default is 7 years. But that's not what the law states, and it really gets complicated. So in order to simplify everything, you just make it easier. So it's very important to only keep what you need and get rid of what you don't. And of course, disposing of it properly is also a consideration too, whether you have to shred the information or just how you physically delete it off electronic storage. And then, of course, if you're handling any of the credit card information and you have it on any type of paper, so whether that's the receipt, a photocopy, anything else that you have physically, make sure that you lock all that information up and limit access to it. So this goes back to the need to know piece of that. So online security, of course, I think a lot of people are aware of these suggestions, but it's always good to refresh ourselves. So never give out personal or confidential information. So, how many times, as I mentioned before, do people get a phone call out of the blue and somebody says, oh, I need this, what's your account number? What's your social security number? The other day I had somebody who wanted the last 4 digits of my social security number. So I would say, always be skeptical and be careful in terms of what personal information you provide and which ways you provide it. Of course, many of our institutions that we deal with, whether it's our bank or other financial institutions, will tell you exactly how they will contact you. Your local jurisdictions will say, we will never call you up, or they will, contact you via mail, but won't send you an email or things like that. So you need to be aware of the methods, and then always protect your information in terms of how you hand it out. When you're online, be cautious of linked web pages. So it's always better to type in the address directly. So especially for when you're going to your financial institution, if you have it bookmarked, that's fine. But if you get an email and it has a link there, unless you're positive that it comes from your bank, better not to click the link. Better to go and type it in directly. And always look for that you're on a secure website. So whether it's that lock icon or HTTPS in the address field, it's always something good to validate, especially when you're transmitting personal or sensitive information. So email security, if you are handling sensitive information via email, it's always good to send as encrypted. There are different methods to do this. Sometimes in larger organizations, you might have a service that sends encrypted information. If you don't, and you're just using general email, one of the easiest things to do is to create an attachment and use Word or Excel to password protect the file. And as you password protect it, it says you want to encrypt it with a password, and you can send an encrypted attachment via email. It's an extra step, and even though sometimes passwords can be cracked, it's a little bit harder than to see things in free text. And always use complicated or complex passwords. You should always hover over hyperlinks before clicking on them, and we'll have an example of that in a couple slides. Make sure that you're not opening attachments. So if you receive an email from someone who you don't know, just don't click on the link or click on the attachment. Make sure that you're taking a look at where it's sending you. And if they say, I'm from Bank of America, but the link is not going to Bank of America, or the attachment is just there out of the blue that you weren't expecting, I would not open it up. And the last point here is an exact example of that. One of the phishing scams that are out there, or the spam that you might receive, is somebody saying, oh, I'm inviting you to this meeting, and here's the agenda, and you click on the attachment, and suddenly you're infected with malware. A couple of years ago, a common exploit was for people to say, oh, we're having a reunion, or something's happening, and here's the invite. And with phishing, groups do this a lot as well too. They will research where you went to school and send you something targeted from the educational institution. So here's an example of how to spot email phishing, right? So in this example, this is for PayPal Australia, right? But if you take a look at it, it's not coming from what the Australia PayPal address is. So, always check the email addresses. Take a look at content, right? So the subject and the content in it might not be formatted correctly, might have grammatical errors, there might be spelling mistakes, right? Anything that doesn't quite look right, you should be suspicious of. We have an example here of bad grammar. I think you see that a lot. And then an example of hovering over the link, right, to check the URL, and you'll see here it's using a direct web address instead of, so it's using the IP address, those 4 sections of numbers, instead of a true web address. So sometimes that's a dead giveaway, but you should always be suspicious, as I said, of the links and the attachments. And then it would be, I can't type in that address directly. I mean, it's not going to take me to Bank of America. It's certainly going to take me somewhere, but it's probably not somewhere where we want to go. So Judy, I'll take a pause again from that group in terms of what I was talking about to see if there's any questions so far.
Hi, Rich. Thank you. No, this is all great information. Right now, we've been answering some questions back and forth via the tool, so I think it's okay for you to continue on. Thank you.
Okay, great. So mobile device security, I mean, I think this one's easy to say, but not a lot of people do some of these things. So I would ask the community here as how many people do have their phone password protected, you know, whether that's through 4 digits or 6 digits or through a fingerprint or Face ID or whatever. You know, it's always good to have a way to lock your phone because you never know, you know, you put it down and who can pick it up. So that's number one. Any type of mobile device you should encrypt if possible. There's different ways that you can use encryption as part of the operating system, where you can just say, encrypt my data. You have to go into your settings and make sure that that's there, but that's an option that I would look at. For instance, here at ARC, we encrypt all of our laptops, so if anyone loses a laptop, we're not worried about somebody being able to break into it and see the information that it contains. And then when you're browsing, I mean, turn on some of the security features that are inherent in there, whether it's, you know, private browsing so things aren't tracked, what you do with cookies, those types of things, all of those features. They're built into browsers now. It's really not too hard to turn those features on, but it helps in terms of protecting your sessions. So username password security. Make sure that you're using a complex password, at least 8 characters long. In fact, if you keep on listening to the media, right, it should be a little bit longer now, and that all has to do with how long does it take for someone to crack your password. So it should be long. Maybe you want to use a phrase. You should definitely use all different types of characters, so letters, numbers, special characters, and make sure that you don't have dictionary words. So just using a simple word like ambulance 2 can still be cracked, right? So how you sprinkle in the numbers and those types of things, so substituting zeros for O's, ones for L's, you know, things like that, or creating a long phrase and being able to memorize that. Certainly should never share your user ID and password, and you should not reuse your user IDs and passwords. Your user ID is probably good to use. Your passwords you should not reuse. So I know that's an easy thing to say. You know, even variations of a password, just changing one letter doesn't always help, because, you know, as passwords get compromised, and I think we've seen plenty of stories of passwords being compromised. If you're only off by one letter, people will use that to try to get at an account you might have that's similar. So as much as you can, use different passwords. Certainly don't use the same passwords across all of your websites. Don't use the same password that you have at work, at home. And I would really suggest for the ones, and I know, you know, it's hard with all the different passwords that we have to use, is think about having the most complex passwords for your most sensitive data, or use a password vault, right? So they come embedded in your iPhone operating system, or I'm sorry, just your phone operating system, and within your computer. So there's ways to remember passwords, or you can use a third-party tool. So whether it's embedded in a browser, or there's tools, something like called KeyPass, that's a password vault. So it'll keep all your user IDs and your password in one application. And then make sure that you change your passwords frequently. And then, again, I know that's another one that's a suggestion that probably is ignored by most people unless they're forced to. And I think that's what most research shows, is that once I put in a password, I'm not going to change it. So that's another reason to have a really, truly complex password if you're not going to change it, but something that can be remembered or at least retrieved. But for the sensitive data that you have, you really should be thinking about changing the password often. And unfortunately, for a lot of financial information, it's normally when somebody is breached that you end up hearing about it, and then you think about, or that they tell you to change your password because it has been compromised in some way. So remote access, what should you do when you're out of the office? One thing that I would suggest is to keep work and personal separate. So don't send your work email to your personal account. Try to log back in if you can. I know, again, that's another one to easily say, that makes sense for people, but it's sometimes difficult to do. But at ARC, we absolutely tell everyone to separate their work and personal accounts. In our mobile device management software, we do not allow those two things to mingle. Your company might have a different policy, but it's a good practice not to do that. And then, be cautious on public wireless networks. So whether I'm at Starbucks, whether I'm in a hotel, the best thing to always do is to connect back when doing work and use a VPN, so your session is encrypted. And certainly, if you're using a public wireless network for personal reasons, I would wait to do anything of a financial nature until I was back home, or at least on a secure connection, right? So again, whether I'm using a personal VPN or a work VPN, and VPN is a virtual private network, right? It's to set up a session so that nobody can see what you're doing. Personal VPNs, all available, whether you want to have it on your phone, whether you want to put it on your computer, easy to get from the App Store, and easy to use. So social media, again, talking about putting things with work and personal life separate. So don't post confidential company information on social media. I know that's a easy thing to say, but again, for travel agents, hard thing to do, right? So, you have to really think about what are you going to post and when are you going to post it. You really have to think about timing. Certainly from a personal level, consider avoiding social media until your travel is complete. But again, you want to tell people what you're doing. You have to be cautious there. Plenty of examples where people are saying, here's where I'm at, and maybe somebody uses that for a phishing campaign, or else maybe somebody goes and robs their residence. Again, something to think about in terms of when to share what you're doing and when you're doing it. So be cautious. And then within social media, same thing as we were talking about with an email, is be cautious on clicking any links, because they can be infected with virus and malware. I mean, I think you see a lot on social media now where what they call clickbait, right? They just want you to get onto the site, and then they'll start throwing different things at you, pop-ups, links to click. It all starts with an article, maybe talking about, I don't know, the cast of Friends or something like that. So just trying to get you to go elsewhere and not watch what you're doing, and suddenly, you might get infected with malware. So some signs of malware infection, if you're working on your computer or on your phone, and suddenly somebody calls you up and says, hey, I got this weird email from you. I mean, something might be on your system. The system might slow down. You might see the blue screen of death, right? And you might have to reboot. Pop-ups start showing up on your phone or on your desktop. I think everybody's probably experienced this one way or another. Most of the time, the best thing to do if you've clicked on something that you shouldn't have, or if you start seeing behavior first, is to shut down your browser, maybe shut off your computer, reboot, If you're unsure of what you did, certainly using a virus scanner or a malware scanner is recommended. And if you really don't know what's happening, right, bring it to a professional, let them take a look at it, whether that's your IT department or from a personal level, right? Maybe talking to the Geek Squad at Best Buy. I think a lot of these places can do things remotely. Sometimes you have to bring them in, but it's a service that you might have to pay for. And certainly don't trust anyone who's just calling you out of the blue and telling you that they can see your system. So some general technology use guidelines. You get it from your machine. Don't leave your computer or desk unlocked. Use Control-Alt-Delete, lock your screen. That's actually one of the PCI controls that's there, is not to leave your screen, not to leave your computer available while you're not around it. Always make sure that your operating system software is up to date. So make sure that you have the latest version, because in those versions are security updates. So whether it's for your operating system or for specific products, try to be on the most recent version and patching as possible, because the exploits as they occur, they have to get fixed, and those come out as new releases or additions, right? So those are updates there. So certainly for your mobile devices, your phones, right, having it set to automatically update is a good idea. And trying to make sure that your devices are up to date is a good thing. Be cautious in terms of installing non-standard software. So that applies whether it's at work, right, where it might be controlled a little bit more, or certainly from a personal level, be cautious of what you're installing on the App Store, right, or from the App Store. Take a look at how many other people have used the same application. Take a look and read the comments, right, to see, are people satisfied with what's there. I mean, it's hard for people to fake, hundreds and hundreds of comments. It takes a lot to do it. So certainly, you have to be cautious when believing crowds, but there is some level of comfort in crowds, kind of like, Amazon reviews. So read them, take it with a grain of salt, but be cautious in terms of what you put on your computer or on your phone. And then, be aware of keeping personal and work separate. When you're doing something for work, use the corporate account. If I'm going to be on social media, try not to use your personal account for that. So hopefully that can address what people might encounter, when it comes to other data. Physical security, this is more personal than so much at work, but be aware of your surroundings at all times, whether you're at work or whether you're outside of work. Just from a safety level, a lot of things can happen. So this is kind of, goes along with the see something, say something, but from a personal level, understand who's around you, what people are doing, take a look at your environment, and be cautious, right? So, leaving work late at night or being somewhere at a mall, look at lighting, look at how many people are around, understand where you're at. At work, you should always display your ID badge, right? So, if there's somebody there who you might not know, the question always is whether or not you should challenge that individual. Certainly, if you see somebody at work or near a workplace and you don't know who they are, and you're not comfortable talking to them, letting your security team or somebody else know so they can address it, and whether that's calling the police or not, you should do. Office and cabinet keys, right? So again, going back to protecting sensitive information, if I have it within my office or if I have it in a file room, right, leaving the keys laying around isn't really secure, right? So hiding it under a plant or letting people know where it all is isn't a good idea either. So protect that. And if you see something, as I said, say something. That's absolutely a personal thing in terms of whether you directly confront somebody, but certainly let your physical security department know, or whatever it is for your organization. So Judy, I will stop again and see if there are any questions.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Rich. This is a lot of really good information. And one thing I just wanted to add, and maybe you did cover it, is with especially your mobile devices, whether it's your phone or your tablets or something, is obviously the password's important, but also keep wiping your screen, because I've heard there's people now that kind of look at your fingerprint, like if you have 4 digits, they're looking at your phone to see what numbers that you pushed, or your tablets for your security. Is that something that we should be concerned about, like wiping our devices so that our kind of paths to our passwords aren't recognizable?
Yeah, it's always a good idea to keep your screen clear, and I think that also works for different keypads and things like that. Sometimes you can see where things are worn, and it gives people less to try. So yes, I think it's important to do that, especially on mobile devices. The other thing is to try to use longer sequences of passwords too, but keep the screen clear is a good idea.
Okay, great. Another question that came in is, my agency requests copies of a new customer's driver's license and credit card. How long should they keep that info, and where should they store that?
So that's a good question. So in terms of retention, right, and maybe somebody else might have to tell me in terms of what the rule is, but it's really should be what your organization says in terms of it should be retained. I don't know if somebody else wants to say in terms of a requirement that we might have specifically. But absolutely, if you have credit card information, first, or the driver's license, right, recognize that you have this sensitive information and create a secure area to lock it up and store it. And then when you determine it in terms of your retention period, right, then destroy it physically when you can. Okay,
great. Thank you. And those are the questions we have for now, Rich. So I'll let you continue on.
Okay. All right. So talking about what we've seen and how fraudsters operate, right? So it's this idea of first, social engineering versus customer service, right? So the fraudsters want to play on people who want to help, right? So the service is really one of assistance, right? And trying to be helpful. So, the fraudsters will play off on that, right? So that's number one. Two, they'll try to be trusted or authoritative figures, right? So they might pose as doctors or lawyers, and so that you immediately have some higher level of trust, right? Because those professions are inherently supposed to be more trustworthy. What we've also seen is, when they interact with you, is sometimes that a straw purchase is made. In other words, they're a brand new customer. They will come in and make a reservation, purchase a ticket with no real desire to travel on that, right? So it's just to see how they can get through the system to establish them as a customer, and then they'll follow it up with a much larger request to try to exploit the relationship. They absolutely do their research, and so again, when we were talking about before about phishing and spear phishing, right? Same thing happens in the travel industry. They're researching who they're going to contact. They're trying to see what relationships you might have. They're looking for anything within social media, within websites, looking at relationships, trying to figure out the best way to approach the agency in order to exploit the relationship that they're going to try to have with you. One of the other things that we see is, kind of playing on these existing relationships and saying that they were referred, right? So it might be a similar industry, or it might be a similar thing. For instance, if you have a relationship with educational institution and it's maybe one department you're working with, or somebody saying, oh, I'm in a different department and I was referred to you by so-and-so because they saw that somewhere in social media or something like that, and playing off of that relationship. So it's all about gaining confidence, trying to establish a relationship, and then exploiting that relationship at some later point. One thing that we saw in the spring was an incident for ransomware with a very large agency. They actually had a dedicated IT department, and somebody in the organization received an email with an attachment, and somebody actually clicked on the attachment, and immediately some of their systems were encrypted. The person who sent them the email, or the hacker that sent everything, was nice enough to leave a note and say, here's where you can contact me if you would like to get your systems back. The hacker demanded Bitcoin. The company actually negotiated with the hacker to get the keys to decrypt their systems and actually got a discount. They did get their keys back, but it took days for them to fully regain control of their system. So there was a long period of time where they were out, right? The servers that got encrypted, the systems that were encrypted by the ransomware couldn't work. They had to go through this negotiation as well as get their Bitcoin. And then once they got the key, it actually took them a while to decrypt those systems and gain everything back to the state that it was. So, the initial incident took a lot, and then the resolution took a long time. So it had tremendous business impact to the organization. So an example of, needing to be cautious in terms of attachments or mail that's received that you might not be expecting. And then two, to make sure that your systems are up to date and patched as best they can be, because these things do happen. And again, I think the way that we talk about it in security is, not if something's going to happen, but when it's going to happen. And the biggest thing that security departments can do, as well as individuals can do, is to try to minimize the impact as best they can. So if something's absolutely going to happen, the question really is what can I do to make sure that if the event does occur, that it's as small as possible. That's our approach that we take here at ARC, and hopefully that's an approach that most people can take. I think you do it in your personal life, and we should try to do it in work as well. Here's some examples of things that we've seen within the fraud department of what people do. An example of passport, right? Manipulating the image with Photoshop, trying to create a fake item. I think what you end up seeing is things get shifted. One thing you'll notice here in this image, the stars on the picture kind of get modified. Things don't quite look right. We'll show that in another slide, but information is purchased off of the internet, used to create a fake passport, and that's what's used as proof of ID. Here's an example of a manipulated image, right? And there's 3 items that are wrong, or at least 3 items that are wrong here. First, the picture is not head on, it's at an angle. Second, the expiration date isn't a year minus a day to expire from when the passport was issued. And then third, if you look at the bottom, not only is the text kind of slanted, but it's running off the page. So things to look for, you know, to validate passports, but it's things that you see as, you know, images are manipulated and documents are manipulated. Credit cards are the same thing. For this credit card, the BIN, the first 6 digits, is not a U.S. bank account. It's really Capital One. So one thing to look at there. Also, if you take a look at this image, right, platinum is not spelled correctly. So people manufacture things and try to get them through. So checking is always a good idea. Here's on the back of the card, right? You've seen that people will just take standard text, and instead of putting in the correct names, right, we'll leave the default in there, right? Here's full username instead of the name of the bank, or misspellings, right? So always check cards if you can, especially if it's physically in your presence. So I think a lot of that, you know, can change with chip technology, but again, if it's card not present, you know, you're just getting an image, so take a look at that image. Examples that we've seen in the past, you know, education scheme. So, you know, people pretending to be from a educational university, sending in and saying, oh, you know, hey, can you issue tickets for me? You know, again, exploiting a relationship that might already be there, or, you know, using trust, because what professor is going to lie to you? But using some of the techniques that we talked about, looking at, you know, where is the email coming from? You know, if this is coming from an educational institution, it really should be coming from not a personal email address, you know, looking for that .edu to make sure that, you know, the person who's requesting it is actually that person. Another thing, you know, to do is maybe, you know, when you get some of these emails, if it's, you know, suspicious, is to reverse contact, you know, so contact the individual and only use, you know, whatever contact information you might have for the account, right? So it might come in from somebody else, but you might want to verify using the account information that you actually have. Also, looking at the phone number, there's tools out there to validate phone numbers, and so, you know, on this one, doing a reverse phone lookup showed that this was not a valid number. I think that's getting harder to detect with some things, but certainly there are pages out there that talk about fraudulent phone numbers and numbers that people use. I think you also see that a lot at home, where, you know, now the fraudsters try to get a number that's more in the area code or in the city, you know, trying to use the same prefixes to look like a valid number. But certainly it's not the right number that it's coming from. Here's some resources that you can use to look up various information. So whitepages.com for reverse phone lookup, binlist.net, you know, again, looking at that BIN number. So which credit card company issued that credit card, sometimes using Google Maps, you know, as the address that you're being given, an actual address that they're telling you they're from. So is it, you know, is it the school? Is it really their house? And then the whocallsme.com, again, that we talked about, areas where you can see maybe complaints if somebody's reusing a phone number, and is it valid or not. So I will pause again to see if there's any more questions before.
No, we're good here, Rich.
Okay. So a resource that we have is actually on our corporate website, right? So I have the address actually at the bottom of this page, so it's fraud prevention. I think if you just go to the website and actually type in fraud, it'll bring you to the link on this page, and there's plenty of resources that we have there. I think you'll see that there are, some of the schemes that we've talked about with much more detail, fraud alerts, right, best practices. It's a great page to go to and a resource to use. So in summary, right, in terms of everything that we've talked about, you as an individual are really the last control between the cyber criminal and your organization, also in your personal life, right? You really should be aware of your own internal security policies, but also some of the things that we talked about. Be skeptical. Challenge some of the information that you're being given when you're not sure, especially when it's a new relationship. Always protect sensitive data and protect yourself, and you will keep yourself and your colleagues safe by being vigilant. And share this information. I mean, when you see things, not only say something to someone in authority or in terms of somebody who has to handle it, but let other people know. If you see people not handling information properly, let them know. Be a good example, but also share the knowledge that you have. And that's all I have for today's discussion.
Thank you, Rich. This was a lot of informative information, reinforcement of maybe some things we've heard before, but some new things as well. This has been great. Rich has up on his screen right now for all of you on the phone, is our 5th annual ARC Travel Connect conference. It will be held here at National Harbor, October 11th to the 12th. If you haven't signed up already, there you can go to arctravelconnect.com actually that, just arctravelconnect.com to register for the conference. And we hope that you all can join us. It's a great way to connect with our airline partners, your peers in the industry. GDSs will be there and other third parties, but it really is a great conference, and to hear really what, how the industry is evolving and what that looks like now and moving into the future. And so thanks, Rich. Also, I want to just hope that you all can join us as well for next week. We have our final 2 webinars coming up next Wednesday and Thursday. On Wednesday, we will have a guest presenter, and that title of that session is Fraud in the Travel Sector, Insights from Law Enforcement and Cyber Forensics. That would be a really interesting one to attend. And the next one on Thursday is kind of wrapping this all up and tying it together. It's going to be an expert panel, The True Cost of Fraud for Travel Agents. So I think those will be 2, again, really interesting, informative sessions, educational. You can sign up for those at our arccorp.com site/events, and you can sign up for them there. It's also on our TAC. We send out email invites as well. I know Rich had brought up the slide where it had our fraud page where you can find a lot of information. We'll also be posting all these recorded webinars there in October. But the fraud hotline, I think Rich kept reinforcing it. If you see something, say something, or if you suspect, say something. Don't hesitate to contact us. We have a fraud hotline. That number is 855-358-0393, or send us an email, stopfraud@arccorp.com. Again, we thank you for joining us on a Friday afternoon, and really a really warm thank you to you, Rich, for spending your time with us today. We know everybody is busy, and I also want to thank Cornelius and Doug who put this whole month together. So we again hope you have joined us previously and hope you can join us next week. Thanks a lot, everyone. Have a great weekend.